The 2.5 political sciences is a space where regional and global political turbulences is examined without overscriptations, yet also without academic borings. Two political sciences and a guest, an expert whose perspective goes beyond a single discipline, analyze domestic and international politics and connect them into a coherent whole. The podcast's title is not just a wordplay, it's a metaphor for a world in which one perspective is not longer enough. We need at least 2.5.
Welcome to the podcast 2.5 Political Scientists, where we, together with our guest, talk about politics that shape the world beyond Slovakia's borders and about why it should matter to you more than you may think. A podcast where you will learn everything you want to know about what's happening in the world, but you never had anyone to ask. Today discussion is focused on Turkish foreign policy in translation. Josef, would you mind to introduce our honorable guest?
Yes, of course. You can see or listen that we speak English today because our guest is not Slovak or Czech. He's from Turkey, Professor Enes Bayraklı. He's head of Department of Political Science and International Relations in Turkish-German University in Istanbul. He studied political science in Vienna, and he has a PhD from this university. He had many positions during his life, but he's an expert for Turkish international policies, and we are glad that he came to our podcast today.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Let me elaborate more on our today's episode, and today we will examine one of the most consequential shifts in contemporary Turkish foreign policy, the gradual but unmistakable move towards strategic autonomy since 2016. Today, Turkey occupies an contested position. It's still a NATO member that purchased Russian air defense, which is quite controversially topic, right? And it's country that mediates between Russia and Ukraine since basically full-scale invasion started, and it's still refusing to join Western sanction, and it's acting as a regional power that has intervened militarily in Syria, Libya, also supported Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. How we should make sense of this? Is Turkey shifting away from the West and the EU, or is executing a rational, if risky strategy to expand its room for maneuver in a changing international order? That's why we will discuss with our guest. And I think fundamental question we need to ask is what we are actually witnessing today. Is it a genuine rupture in Turkish strategic culture or latest iteration of very old playbook? So I will try to now open the big picture for our listeners and ask a question. First question, when you look at Turkish foreign policy over last decade, what is the single and the most important structural shift that explains Turkish behavior? Is it domestic role of AKP, a party under the thumb of President Erdogan, or it's a recent development, but we can observe it also back to the past, changing international order, or is it something much deeper? We, as observers from outside, we cannot even comprehend, and it's deeper in Turkish strategic culture.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I think the changes that we are seeing and Turkey's involvement in its surroundings that you mentioned. Turkey's military interventions in different conflicts are a direct result or a reaction to the changes in the international system. So, of course, there are things also happening in Turkey, domestic changes that made it possible for Turkey to get involved, and militarily speaking, because Turkey has built also its own defense capacity, defense sector, defense industry, and this has started in 2004. So we can say that Turkey's request for strategic autonomy started way before 2016, but we started to see the results after 2016, but yet this was only possible after Turkey felt abandoned by its allies, for instance, United States. And today, I think not only Turkey, but everybody is experiencing same, kind of attitude from the United States. And you talked about in the beginning about the change of axis in Turkish foreign policies. Turkey is, turning away from the West, but we should first ask the question, do we have still a West that is unified? Of course, after Trump's treatment of European leaders and EU and Denmark question and his attitude towards Ukraine and Russia-Ukrainian crisis, we cannot really talk about a unified West. So in this new age and era, I think there are not only Turkey, but many actors are going to invest more and more on strategic autonomy. And we already see the question is being raised, and the European Union leaders and European countries are already investing in this field. And they are already feeling that they are very late for this development. I think the Europe was in a sense of strategic blindness in the last 10 years. They did see the developments, but they didn't want to recognize them and acknowledge them because the price is too high. To take away resources from social welfare, to invest it in military defense, and it's really a huge political decision. And for many European leaders, it was something really dramatic, a radical change. They were not ready to take these decisions. But then Trump's second administration made it everybody clear that it is something that is unavoidable. Now we are seeing the consequences of this. So Turkey did felt these changes way before the Europeans and started to adopt its foreign policy very flexibly because Turkey did not have any. For instance, the Syrian crisis was evolving, and the things that were happening in Syria were very touching the nerves of Turkish national security. And our biggest ally in NATO, the United States, was acting, in opposition to Turkey. Not only United States, but Russia was also acting against Turkey, Iran, Assad regime. And many other actors. So Turkey felt abandoned, and at the same time there was a coup attempt in Turkey during which Turkish parliament was bombed by Turkish F-16 fighter jets. I don't think the trauma has been really understood by European or Western.
Fethullah Gulen exiled United States.
Yeah, and the leader of the cult, Fethullah Gulen, he was residing in Pennsylvania. And many are arguing that he was not responsible for this, his followers, but whoever is following Turkish politics closely, the experts in the world, they know that Gulen was involved in
strings.
Yes, pulling the strings. So after the coup attempt, Turkey decided to acquire the Russian S-400 missile defense system. I think the main reason was Turkish government did not want again Turkish parliament to be bombed. Actually, Turkey asked from United States Patriot missile defense systems. U.S. was not really willing to sell. F-35, we have seen the same story. Some say that S-400, because of S-400, United States is not selling to Turkey F-35. But the problem started way before. Around 2008, Israel started to they started lobbying Washington not to sell F-35 to Turkey because it will change balance of power in the Middle East. So these questions are very complex. It's not a one-way street. And even Trump himself, he acknowledged that because of patriots were not given to Turkey, Turkey bought S-400. These developments forced Turkey to invest on strategic autonomy, as I said, way before Europeans. And Turkey is much more prepared today than many European countries in terms of defense, in terms of its army, battle readiness of its army, and so on. That's why Turkey is an inevitable ally for many European countries in defense and security matters.
Sorry, maybe I broke your discussion.
No problem.
But I have a question. What does it mean, the term strategic autonomy? Because if I correctly remember, during time it was Mehmet Davutoğlu, Minister of Foreign Affairs, foreign policy of Turkey was a good relationship with neighbors.
Neighbors, yeah.
How change Turkish foreign policy when we start this part of this strategy? What does it mean, autonomy, strategic autonomy? Because, for example, our current government have a foreign policy name. We are friends with all,
like four vectors,
four vectors,
north, west, south.
Multidimensional.
What does it mean? Strategy autonomy. It's same or it's something special?
Well, Davutoğlu called it his doctrine as a strategic depth doctrine. And of course, he also called for good neighborly relations with all the neighbor countries, friendly relations. This is something that you can aim for, but then there are developments beyond your control. For instance, Turkey has improved its relations with Syria. It was really bad between 2000 and 2011, but then these problems in Syria started. First, Turkey tried to convince Assad regime to carry out reforms, and he was convinced at the beginning, but then his circle and the Baas party, made a lot of pressure on Assad, and he didn't carry out these reforms, and then there was a full-blown out civil war, and Turkey had to change its policy vis-a-vis Syria. So, and other developments, as I mentioned, starting from 2011 and so on, and the Arab Spring all around the Middle East, and also Russia invaded Ukraine, Crimea 2014. This has all pushed a change of foreign policy for Turkey. For instance, Turkey is involved in Libyan crisis war because of the demands from Greek's side in the Mediterranean. Because of a small island vis-a-vis Antalya's coast, Greek was demanding a very maximalist exclusive economic zone in the Mediterranean. If Turkey accepts these demands, Turkey would only have a small portion of Middle East. But if you compare it with the size of Turkey, this is something not really rational and reasonable. That's why Turkey is involved in Libya. Then Turkey made an exclusive economic zone agreement with the Libyan government, which made the Greek claims, at least ridiculous on the paper. And then it showed also it is subject to discussion and it is not something fixed, according to international law. And that's one thing. So when we come back to the question of what has changed, Turkey felt the need to intervene in many conflicts. So up until that time, it was more defensive approach. But afterwards, Turkey realized it has to take an offensive approach in order to protect its interests. For instance, up until 2016, Turkey's fight against PKK terror organization was more defensive. Turkey had been carrying out military operations in northern Iraq, but Turkish army was going in, staying there 1 month, going out, going in, going out. But this strategy didn't produce any results, and there were many terror attacks. Turkish soldiers, but also civilians, have been killed. And but in around 2016, Turkey changed its strategy and said, we are going to face the terror organizations outside of Turkey. We are going to limit them and strike them there. And it started with an operation in Syria against ISIS, Daesh, in 2016. Together with what you asked me about strategic autonomy means that you can take decisions in terms of security and defense according to your own interests, without limitations of alliances or being dependent on other countries. But this is not possible if you don't produce your own defense equipment and systems. For instance, Turkey has been very reliant on Germany and the United States in the 1990s. Turkey bought Leopard main battle tanks from Germany, and Turkey wanted to use them in the southeast, but Germany said, no, we are not allowing you to use this in this operations and so on. There were these kind of limitations. So strategic autonomy is mainly, no country in the world is 100% independent. There are, because economic interdependencies and many other things. But when it comes to core national interest, if you can take decisions, and of course you are going to pay a price, it's inevitable, and you are ready to pay the price, and you can take the decision and you can carry out. That's strategic autonomy. But if you are reliant on arms, imports from outside countries, from other countries, then your options are limited. And we see this with the Ukraine case. Ukraine today, its fate being discussed and negotiated by Putin and Trump. Does Ukraine have a say in these negotiations? I don't know. They're very limited, because they don't have the material power, and the material power doesn't translate into negotiating power.
And one more question, very short. The strategic autonomy is a policy which is it's a consensus around the political party or political system, or party system, or it's only politics of AKP?
Of course, AKP is not alone. There is also another party that is supporting is MHP, another party, Turkish Nationalist Party, what we can translate, Nationalist Movement Party. And other small parties also supporting this. And if you ask Turkish population, what should be Turkey's direction in foreign policy? Should Turkey have an alliance with the East or Turkey countries or the Muslim world or the West? The biggest group is, I think, around 60%, more than 60% says Turkey should be a center of power itself. And 10% says we should have an alliance with the Turkic world, 10% with and so on. So there is a desire in Turkey amongst the population to be more independent. And I don't see that the opposition is in Turkey, Republican People's Party, is not unified, is in disarray. There is not a real foreign policy vision in the Republican People's Party. They are criticizing certain aspects of the foreign policy, but they cannot put a coherent vision of foreign policy. They cannot say, okay, instead of this vision, we would like to have this vision. They don't have this coherent policy, what I can say.
One interesting takeaway that I understood from what you were saying is that Turkey understood the chessboard, basically, or geopolitical chessboard of the region long before the EU even realized something is going in the neighborhood, right?
I think they realized, but they were afraid to acknowledge it and take measures.
Actually, and good point, right? Like the social benefits, it's hard to abandon them.
Yes.
Right? Like it's a tough decision.
Yes.
You will piss off your voters, so literally. Excuse my French. Regarding the EU and Turkish relationship, it seems like it's in the mutual disillusionment, right? EU accession is frozen. Turkish leaders stopped treating European integration as a policy priority, right? Does Turkey still need the West, and does the West still need Turkey in the way it once did, maybe during Ataturk era, and why has the sentiment regarding the EU and accession shifted? And one small comment from my side, I really remember when I spent in classes time with my Turkish classmates, and they were really enthusiastic about the EU and Turkish accession to EU. It was in 2013. So now you can tell us, like, what's the current sentiment in Turkey?
Well, the current sentiment in Turkey about EU is more like a practical approach. If you ask the population, it's going up and down, the support for the EU. Whenever there is a problem, economic problem, the support for the EU membership is going up, because people tend to think about Europe as an economic, powerhouse and stabilizing factor, whatever. But whenever people feel confident, the support is going down. And of course, whenever there are critical events, like the coup attempt or the Turkish military interventions in Syria, and there is too much criticism from Europe, the support is going down. Because for Turkey, the survival for Turkish population or Turkish people, the survival of the country is a real issue, a real problem. It's not something distinct problem, It's not a hypothetical problem. When you look at what is happening around Turkey, the Syria, and today the narrative from Israeli government, Turkey will be the next after Iran, this kind of rhetoric, then the question of security and survival becomes something very, very, concrete problem. And that's why Turkish voters are reacting to this developments around them. Actually, Turkish voters are quite also politicized. I mean, in Turkey, the elections, the elections participation is more than 80%. Sometimes it's 88%. So 88 people out of 100 goes to elections, cast their votes, because they care about the future of the country. And when you say the future of, Turkey or European Union and Turkey's relations, as you mentioned, a European Union, I think, needs Turkey in this new environment, but Turkey also needs European Union, and especially in terms of defense. And if there are more geopolitical shocks, let's say there is an agreement between Russia and the US, a really bad agreement for Europe, and then Trump decides to downsize its military involvement in Europe. Even he's talking about leaving the NATO, right? If he leaves NATO, then Europe will be, facing the whole Russian threat alone. Is Europe ready to face Russia alone? I don't think so. But at the same time, Russia is also a problem for Turkey. We have good relations with Russia, balanced relations, let's say, but this doesn't mean that Turkey and Russia, militarily speaking, are allies.
Because you know your history very well, right?
Yeah, we know our history very well also with the Russia. And also, we don't go back to 100 years back, just what happened in Syria. In Syria, Russians were supporting Assad regime. Assad regime was falling down, 2015. First, Iranians came, Hezbollah came, Shia militias came, they weren't enough. Then Russians intervened. They bombed the hell out of cities, hospitals, infrastructure, Aleppo. They created waves of refugees, millions of refugees. And then Turkey intervened. They supported the PKK, Russia. then Turkey intervened militarily and created some kind of safe zone in the border. And around 2019, there was these pockets of land Turkey was controlling, and Idlib. That was what was left out of Syrian revolution. And together with Iran, Russia pushed an operation towards Idlib. And the idea was there were around 4.15 million refugees or people living in Idlib. They wanted to ethnically cleanse Idlib, push all the refugees towards Turkey. Probably half of them would be also go to Europe, and they will solve the problem with Syria, right? And Turkey supported the Syrian, opposition there. And what Russia did was they bombed Turkish, military positions in Idlib. More than 30 Turkish soldiers were killed during these attacks. And then Turkey increased its military involvement, and there was an agreement. What I say here is that we didn't have a really stable relationship with Russia. It was a really difficult situation for you. You are facing Russia in Syria. Turkish army wasn't ready in 2016, didn't have enough drones or air missile defense systems. Turkish Air Force was only operating from outside of Syrian airspace, hitting certain targets there. And also in 2014-15, Turkey shot down the Russian jet, You know what happened afterwards? There were some American Patriot missile defense systems in Turkey. After Turkey shot down Russian fighter jet, Americans withdrew their air missile defense systems. Basically, they left us alone with Russia. Only Spain stayed in Turkey. So this also made it Turkey quite clear that Turkey is alone in its struggle in Syria. But somehow at the end of the day, Assad regime fell because of those Israeli involvement. They hit the Iranian regime and militia so badly that it produced unwanted consequences for the Israelis. Israelis didn't want Assad regime to fall down, but they hit so strongly that the Assad regime also fell, and the Syrian opposition took also advantage of this situation. So with Russia, Turkey didn't have this quite easy relationship. In Ukraine war, it started 2014. Also, there were some problems before 2014. After 2014, Turkey was talking to Russians, but at the same time arming the Ukrainians. Turkey sold around 2018, I think, armed drones to Ukraine. And our European allies, especially Germany, was criticizing Turkey. German media, they were saying, oh, why are you selling these weapons to Ukraine? You are provoking Putin, and he will, attack, and he will create problems for us. This is very provocative, very unthoughtful of Turkey.
Bayraktar drones.
Bayraktar drones, right? And then what happened? 2022, Russians invaded, and then suddenly Europeans decided, okay, we go for war. But Turkey had more a balanced approach because Turkey knows Russia and Putin. It's a long game with Putin. It's not a short game, and you need to be persistent, and you need to show strategic patience with the Russians. Otherwise, you will lose, and the consequences of losing is very dramatic. I don't need to remind you what happens when the Russians took control of any country.
Just out of curiosity, and then you can go with your question. What happened to port of Tartus? Because it used to be like strategic port in Syria, where Russia used to, park their ships. And what happened to that port? Like, are Russians still there, or they left?
I think some Russian troops are still in Syria. We need to acknowledge that there's a new government in Syria, and they are also following their own interests. They have their own policy, their own, balance of power. And in order to, have a more balanced, foreign policy, I think they decided to keep Russians in Syria, but in a much, controlled way. And I think the negotiations still are ongoing. But Russia's presence is not as it used to be because they need all the resources for Ukraine war. Because also that's why Assad regime fell. Russia, one factor was Israelis intervened and hit Shia militias very strongly, but at the same time Russians had to withdraw troops from Syria for the Ukrainian war. So they are staying there, but their role is being still subject to negotiations, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I want to back to European Union and Turkey relationship. You said that Turkey needs European Union and European Union needs Turkey. But it's a long story. It's in your
lecture.
Be a member of European Union from late 50s and 1999 you start last part of negotiation. But time is changing, and the European Union has changed, Turkey has changed. And my two questions are: first one is, how is the opinion? What is the opinion about integration to the European Union in Turkey's politics discussion, political elite, current government, and how, for example, opposition have an opinion about this membership? And second one, what is for your opinion? What is the problem that everybody know that we need each other, but you still waiting and they know a light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, as you mentioned, Turkey first applied to European Union or European Economic Council or Community 1959, 67 years ago, and still is not a member of the EU. The current government is not pushing really hard for a membership. There are a lot of reasons, but I think main reason is that when we started the negotiations with the European Union in 2005, it was a stillborn process from the beginning. Right when we started, Austria and France blocked certain chapters. They said we are going to have referendums about Turkish membership, but this is not a fair game anymore because you fulfill the criteria, you become a member. But if you fulfill the criteria, but the membership is not secure, you don't fulfill the criteria. You don't, give away certain aspects of your sovereignty. That's one aspect. The second issue is now today in Turkey, I think when you talk about EU membership, it's about two things or three things, let's say. One is customs union modernization or update with European Union, because we are in the customs union. In 1995, Turkey entered customs union, and that makes Turkey a special case. Why accept a country in customs union but not as a full member? It doesn't make sense. Second, visa liberalization. Actually, Turkish citizens, they have this right from 1963 agreement, but European institutions are blocking this. They are not implementing it. If there is visa liberalization, Turkish businessmen, citizens, and the people will be moving freely in the Schengen area, and that is what is more important for Turkish people. The second issue. Third issue is defense cooperation, security cooperation, especially in defense industries. And Turkey has built a solid defense industries infrastructure and is exporting a lot, but European market is huge, and at the same time European countries, they need this, and already there are good cooperation, bilateral cooperations like Spain or Italy. Turkey has built its first aircraft carrier with the help of, it's not an aircraft carrier, but it can carry drones. But Turkey is also started building an aircraft carrier last year, but with the Spanish help or technology transfer. With the Italians also. We are producing together, and Turkish companies are cooperating together with the Italian counterparts, famously Bayraktar. And these three areas are really important. I think the full membership is nowadays, nobody is really discussing this seriously. But also Turkish government is not pushing hard for this. Why? As we mentioned, Turkey realized these changes in the international system way before European Union and acted quickly and very flexibly. But if we were in the European Union, it will be really difficult for Turkey to carry out all these operations, right? So European Union, being a member of the European Union, comes also with advantages and disadvantages. And in a world of constant changes and dynamic world, being a member of European Union becomes a real problem.
In other words, strategic autonomy is in direct conflict.
Yes.
Line with the accession to the EU
membership. Yes, that is my personal view. I mean, but whereas in a stable world, European Union membership is very good, right? For instance, in the 1990s, 2000, up until 2010, 2015, it was a good thing to have. But now we are entering an area of dramatic changes in the international system, rupture in the international system. Being a member of EU, I don't think it makes sense for Turkey. That's my personal view. If you ask the government's view, they are not saying this publicly. There is no statement like this. They are saying we are a candidate country, we want to become a member of EU, but they are not pushing for it. We can see this.
It's probably the reason that European Union is an organization, or maybe something like this, quasi-state, which is good for good weather, but we in the European Union see that we have many problems.
Yeah.
And storm is coming.
Storm would be tornado.
Yeah. And if I may comment, and I will kind of state something I learned during foreign policy classes I took in Turkey actually, and I remember teachers saying that Germany and France, due to certain ratio in a vote, when you are voting in a European Parliament, that's the reason why they refuse Turkish membership, because it's a country with it's populous country, right? Almost 100 million, and it would kind of outvote them. Let's call it.
Yeah, it will change the balance of power in many institutions. Yeah,
the institutions.
Yes,
it could create alliances with V4. Where we are in V4.
Yes, of course.
Poland. Hungary, Czech Republic, and Slovak Republic. It could create some, alliances, and we would kind of change the balance of power.
Yes.
Do you think this is the case, or there are?
I think this is one of the reasons, of course, balance of power, change of balance of power in the international institutions, but also economic reasons. For instance, we see that Germany and Austria is dominating the Balkans, economically speaking. But you open the map and look at the map, and you see Istanbul is just 500 kilometers away from Sofia, 700 kilometers away from Bucharest. Many Balkan cities are much, much closer to Istanbul. If Turkey enters the European Union fully, with a full customs union, then Turkish industries, many industries will dominate the Balkans. And it will be a main rival to German companies or Austrian companies, let's say, in the Balkans. And that's one of the economic reasons also, the second one. A third one is a culturalist reason, debate, that Turkey is a Muslim majority country, cannot be part of Europe. And that's, I think, one of the fundamental issues about Europe. But I think this can also change with a strong geopolitical shock. It can force European elites to redefine and reconsider European identity. That will include also Turkey. But for that, we need an outside shock, a shock coming from outside. With the current domestic structures, European elites are not able to redefine Europe's identity. There is too much Eurocentric understanding of the world history, European history, and this history is written by excluding Muslims or Turks or Ottomans, whatever, from this history. Although they were always part of this history, this way or that way. But these elites, they choose to write their history excluding Muslims and Turks. But when there is enough geopolitical shock, they can rethink and reconsider, reconfigure everything, because then the survival will be at stake.
And the paradox is that basically the core element of the EU existence is the enlargement, right?
Yeah.
Without the enlargement, this idea or the concept or the policy can exist any longer.
Yes.
I think we can observe this in the past few years.
No, I think the EU enlargements were really successful and brought certain kind of stability to Balkans and certain parts of Eastern Europe. I think European Union was really very late to integrate Ukraine. When the Cold War ended, and when the Americans declared the end of history, famously, right? There won't be any problem. That's the end of history, and our system is the perfect system. Everybody will accept this. It's inevitable. This is a very simplistic and naive understanding of history. It's a childish dream or thinking, but it was the case. And the Europeans, they also believed this story, and they thought they have the time, indefinite time. Ukraine can wait another 50 years, no problem. Turkey, let them wait another 100 years, We have all the time, but you don't have all the time. There was an opportunity window from 1990s around 2011, 2008, something like that. Europeans could really integrate Ukraine to the European structure, European Union, but they were late. And what happened? Russians, they regained their power, and starting from 2008, Putin started to question everything. In Munich Security Conference, he made a famous speech. He said, the current status quo is not sustainable. You have promised us certain things after NATO or end of the Cold War. You didn't, keep these promises, and we are not going to allow this. And then he intervened in Georgia and then Ukraine. So I think European Union was in that way successful in many areas in the east of Europe, but the Ukraine they weren't successful. They could have also done this with Turkey. Turkey was ready to enter European Union. There was this window of opportunity between 2005, 2012, because of these small universities for problems, calculations, and they didn't use this chance. And I think that is lost now. We are living in a totally different area. The same thing happened in Cyprus, for instance. There was an UN brokered deal, peace plan, and that was put to referendum. Turkish side accepted 70%, Greek side refused 70%, because Greek side thought, we have all the time. The future is with us. We will be a member of EU. We can enforce Turks, our conditions. We can, have a much better deal. But the future didn't bring you a better deal. It's a gamble.
Yes.
It's a gamble, and I think that gamble didn't play out.
People talking something about NATO. Because,
I think we've slightly touched NATO, but maybe I would love to go back to Turkish foreign policy. Maybe the core of how the Turkey is acting nowadays in foreign policy, because some scholars argue that there is a deep continuity in Turkish Ottoman strategic culture or heritage, let's call it that way, tradition of balance of power, of thinking, cost sensitivity, and coalition management that can even like survive regime change. And do you think this lens is useful for understanding Erdogan's era foreign policy? And follow-up question is why he did actually abandon Atatürk's legacy in foreign policy, which was more kind of leaning towards the West.
Mm-hmm. Well, we need to really understand the leaders in their own terms and context. For instance, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, he ruled 1923 to 1938 in a totally different world, in which the West was only dominating power, right? Was there any alternative to West? There wasn't. For Mustafa Kemal, and it was not really. It was the reasonable, rational choice for everybody. And also Turkey lost the war, First World War, and it had to accept most of the conditions that was put in front of Turkey. And so famously Atatürk declared this policy of peace at home, peace abroad. Yeah, this is a slogan also being used by Kemalists in Turkey, but that's an ideology. And ideologies are not really useful to understand and analyze foreign policy, which is very dynamic. Ideologies are very closed-circuit thinking systems. It's not open to discussion. It's not open to change. There are certain, criteria or principles that you have to follow, but the world doesn't follow your principles, right? Does it? So Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, when he established the republic, he was a soldier. At the same time, he said, "I want peace." That doesn't make sense. But being a rational actor, realist, he realized that Turkey cannot follow the same policies as the previous Ottoman governments. So he famously said, we don't want any, conflict with anybody, peace at home, peace abroad. But when the time came and the opportunity arose, he threatened to intervene militarily in Syria in 1937-38. He massed the Turkish army in the south because the French were ruling like colonial power in Syria, in Hatay, today's Turkish city, Hatay, Alexandria. Sykes-Picot Treaty, right? And in Hatay there was a strong Turkish minority there, and Atatürk wanted to annex Hatay, and he threatened militarily Syria. He used diplomacy, but he used also coercive diplomacy. And at the end, Hatay declared first independence and then the referendum, and they joined Turkey, right? So I don't think that Erdogan is taking ideologically in foreign policy. He's very pragmatic in his foreign policy. When he began his term in 2002, 2003, he followed a very pro-European policy. But then he changed track many times because the world is changing and he's adapting. So, but I think there are many continuities in Turkish foreign policy. There are certain things that you mentioned, this political culture, strategic culture of Turkey, because the geography is same. The problems where we are facing, same. We cannot change that one of our neighbors is Russia, which is a very powerful country. It was always powerful since 1600 on, right? We cannot change the geography that we are a country that is connecting east and west, north and east. That brings lots of advantages, but at the same time, lots of challenges. And that has to be managed. And any regime or country or a state that is established in today's Turkey's geography will face same kind of problems. For instance, it will be in a rivalry with any state that is established in Iran, and that was always the case. Romans, Persians, right, before Greeks, and yeah.
Okay. we have last maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and we still didn't talking about membership of Turkey membership in NATO. Everybody probably knows that Turkish army is the second strongest, second strong army in the NATO. And what does it mean for Turkey be a member of NATO? It's something like prestige, or it's something like which is connected with your strategic autonomy? And what does it mean?
Well, it has many meanings, many issues. But first and foremost, why Turkey wanted to become a member of NATO? It was because of Soviet threats. In 1950, 1949, Stalin threatened Turkey and asked certain territories from Turkey, also military positions, installations, bases in the Bosporus Strait and Dardanelles Strait, and that's why Turkey joined NATO. Second, it was an ideological also question. It was seen as a tool of westernization. Kemalist elites saw all the Western institutions as a way of westernizing Turkey. But this has also brought many problems. There was too much American influence in Turkey. America was dominating Turkish military, equipment, doctrine-wise. Even Turkish intelligence was very closely, linked with the CIA.
And also building roads, right?
Building roads, and so
establishing universities.
But the roads, we built a huge work network, autoways. But at the same time, we stopped building railways. Until 1950s, we were building railways.
Correct.
Yes, because we had to import American cars. For that, we needed roads, etc. So it came with lots of problems, and also military interventions, military coups. Every 10 years, there was a military coup in Turkey. But at the same time,
with coups, there is a connection between military coups and
absolutely 100%. 100%. The military coups in a NATO country does not happen without American involvement or knowledge. Approval at least. Approval at least. But at the same time, being inside the NATO protected us from NATO itself or United States. That's paradox. Yeah. But you see what happens to the countries that are not part of NATO in the Middle East. Iraq, Syria, Iran, all of them, right? So I think it was a wise decision for Turkey to enter NATO. But Americans also, they needed Turkey at that time to, block Russian, movement towards south and to build or contain the Soviets at that time, and after the second end of the war, end of Cold War, of course, United States emerged as the sole hegemon of the international system, and certain aspects of American foreign policy were contradicting Turkey. In Iraq, for instance, their intervention in Iraq. In 2002, when Americans wanted to invade Iraq, they asked permission from Turkey to send their troops from Turkey to invade Iraq, to use Turkish airspace. And there was a discussion in the parliament because the government did need the approval from the parliament. And although the parliament was majority AK party, the decision was not given and it was rejected. Americans were very angry. Very, very angry about this. So being in NATO came with lots of problems, disadvantages, but at the same time with lots of, advantages. But all in all, I think it was a wise decision for Turkey to join NATO because through this, Turkey modernized its army, build a solid army that is, modern and up to date, and that can defend the country. And of course, but what happened after 2000s, Turkey started, as I said, building more and more strategic autonomy because America's interest, Turkey's interests were contradicting. In order Turkey to carry out certain operations in northern Iraq, we needed to build this defense, let's say, infrastructure. For instance, Turkey's region is southeast is very mountainous, and there was a terror organization, the PKK, carrying out attacks, and the Turkish army outposts were really were attacked many times, and Turkey needed, for instance, attack helicopters. But Turkey only had 12 attack helicopters that we bought from the United States. We asked more, but the United States said no, we don't sell. Turkey asked drones, United States said no. Only from Israel Turkey was able to buy at that time, but these were not armed drones. So what happened? Turkey built a cooperation with Italy. Together with Italy, Turkey built attack helicopters, and now Turkey has more than 60. Plus Turkey can export these, but because of certain components in the helicopters, you need American license, and Americans are not giving it. Now Turkey is producing the motor of the helicopter, engine of the helicopter, but this all takes time. You see that it was a struggle. It wasn't an easy way, and there were many also embargoes, hidden or public, from our allies. Even Germans, the Danish government, the Finnish, they weren't selling certain components to Turkey that will be used in defense sector. Many of them Turkey produced locally, but it took time, money, and so forth. But when it comes to strategic autonomy, and when it comes to war, you see that the cost of certain defense equipment does not really, it's not really very important. What is really important is your strategic autonomy, that you can take these decisions. Even if you have billions of dollars, you cannot buy certain equipment. They are not selling it to you. But if you have the technology, and then you can use it wherever you think it's in your interest.
Also sell it.
Yes.
Question what is in the air is if hypothetically, probably not. If Donald Trump say goodbye to NATO, we will be strongest army in NATO. What will be, in your opinion, in Turkey's position? Will be Turkey a protector of European defense, or say goodbye NATO too?
I don't think so. I don't think Turkey will say goodbye to NATO. Turkey probably would want to stay in NATO and continue this. But of course, for this, you need also the European partners to accept this. But I think European partners, they don't have also other options at all. So if US leaves NATO, that will be a total different world. It will be total chaos, let's say. Yeah, to put it at least.
Security umbrella will just
disappear. And then
GDP, or 2% of GDP or 5% GDP will be much higher.
10, maybe 15%.
And that will also remove our overall social benefits and everything.
Yeah, but when your survival at stake, then the state takes all the extra measures, all the extraordinary measures
to keep your welfare state, right?
Yes.
To living under very good conditions. It takes something, and it was because of security guaranteed by US and provided by US, right?
Yeah, let's face this. I mean, the era that Europe has experienced in the last 80 years after the Second World War was something exceptional in its history, also in the human history. Especially in the last 30 years, for instance, after the end of the Cold War, right? But that doesn't mean it will be It will go forever.
Yeah, I remember one scientist said that, let me paraphrase him, like we were literally partying for many years, but party is almost over.
Yeah, yes, party is almost over, and there will be an after party with somebody else. Yes.
But it's one of the options. And what will be Turkey do after this? Can you imagine, or it's a...
Well, I mean, I can imagine, because we were part of NATO, but at the same time we felt abandoned by NATO, as I told you the story in Syria. So Turkey has managed this and is now, because of this experience. In Turkish we have a saying: if you have a bad neighbor, that will force you to buy a house, right? Because you will go and buy a new house, and you will own a house now. So this bad ally forced Turkey to have strategic autonomy. This bad ally, or bad allies, let's say, forced Turkey to have to intervene militarily in many conflicts. That's because of this. Turkey has a very experienced army. Turkey has carried out an operation in Libya, even in Somalia, is carrying out operations now. As far as Romania, these are all happening at the same time. In Syria, Turkish army has bases carrying out operations. Iraq, Libya, Somalia, and so on. And have an army. You have an army with sophisticated weapons is good, but your army should be also battle ready. Some armies are not, their battle readiness is quite low. For instance, German army, right? Or you have an army and expensive weapons like Saudi Arabia, but your army is not a professional army, right? That doesn't, function very well. So these experiences has made Turkey quite well prepared for this new era. And that's why I think, forget about all the other reasons, but just because of these reasons, Turkey is a must partner for European countries. If this happens with a NATO leave of United States, I don't see any alternative scenario for Europe. I don't see.
Very strange. Last 5 minutes. Have a question.
Yeah, let's shoot not literally the closing one, and I will go with this kind of cliche question, but it's always good for the closure for students and researchers trying to understand Turkish foreign policy, which misconception, because in Western media we don't often see some news from Turkey about what you are doing in certain regions, right? And that creates some sort of blind spot. So we face many misconceptions in Western academics and policy circle. What do you think is the biggest one, biggest misconception about what do you do in your region, and how do you perform execute your foreign policy?
Well, I think there is too much emphasis on, when it comes to understanding Turkey, too much emphasis on the personality and the character of President Erdogan. Certain experts are explaining everything with Erdogan. That doesn't fit into reality. Erdogan plays a huge role. He is one of the strongest politicians in Turkish history. He has ruled in the last 24 years now. 24, yeah. More than Atatürk himself.
Yes, of course.
And no other prime minister or president has achieved this success. And he has reshaped Turkey in the last quarter century, let's say last 25 years. But at the same time, Turkish population, Turkish people are quite dynamic population. And beyond that, of course, there are also certain changes in the international system, certain developments in our neighborhood, that's also affecting Turkey's behavior. And any government, any regime type in Turkey would face same problems, Their answers probably would be different, maybe, to a certain extent, but the fundamental problems will stay there. If your ally in Syria wants to establish a Kurdish state there, that is that is also to put extra, that is controlled by PKK, then that is a problem for you. That you need to deal with this. You cannot deal with this only with diplomatic means, talking to Americans, because you are talking from a disadvantage point, asymmetrical point when it comes to dealing with the Americans. They listen to you, but they don't they don't always, most of the time cooperate or act accordingly. So you need to carry out certain, take certain measures on the field. And this is what Turkey has done in Syria in the last 10 years. This is one thing. The second thing is this perception about Turkey changing, the change of axis. This discussion has been around in the at least in the last 35 years, starting from 1990s. It didn't start with Erdogan, or the discussion about neo-Ottomanism. That some, discuss or some argue that Turkey is following a neo-Ottomanist foreign policy. You want to establish a new Ottoman empire, whatever. But this also didn't start recently. The first time neo-Ottomanism, this concept was coined and used was when Turkey intervened militarily in 1974 to Cyprus. And it was used by Greek academics. So it has a context, right? But I think if you ask me about Turkish politics, I think Turkish politicians, regardless of their party affiliation, are one of the most well-educated and experienced politicians in the Middle East when it comes to politics, democracy, party politics, diplomacy, because we have this experience in the last 70, 80 years. We have these free and fair elections in Turkey. It can be disputed. There were some problems here and there, but the result of elections are always are subject to court decisions and open to public. When the votes are discounted, you can see them, and it goes back also to Ottoman era. The first parliament was created in 1878. And we have these long traditions of party politics, civil politicians, and they are really experienced, and they are realist. Most of the time when it comes to these kind of problems. So they are in Turkey, in some European countries, for instance, I lived in Austria, there are some small movements who are calling for the re-establishment of the Austrian Empire, right? Or not the empire, but what is it called? The dynasty. Revisionism. Yeah, the small ones. In Turkey, we don't have this kind of. Nobody is saying in Turkey we should have the sultans back. Sultans back. We should have them back. There is no.
A new sultan, because in a European perspective, President Erdogan is a picture like a
new sultan. Yeah, these are all Orientalist images, in my opinion.
They should read Edward Said.
Edward Said, yeah, they should read Edward Said. Orientalism. But and they realize that Turkish politicians, they realize the era of empires are in the past. Okay, we are living in the era of nationalist states, right? Nation states. So it will be, very archaic to say, oh yeah, let's have an empire. But there can be different types of, different types of, let's say, ways of, cooperation. And one of them is European Union, right? So the European Union is an answer to that problem. Nation states were too small for Europe to cope with the problems that it was facing. That's why it created European Union. European Union is a sui generis organization. There is no example of this in the world. But still it exists today. Why? Because there was a need. So there can be other ways for Turkey to integrate or not integrate, but to cooperate with its neighborhood. When there is no, cooperation or integration, as you said, with the European Union, Turkey will find other ways. And in that sense, Turkey has many options. Some of them are more costly, make less sense, but still Turkey has these options. You mentioned that Slovakia wants to pursue this multidimensional foreign policy. That is, Turkey is also imperative. We cannot follow only a policy based on, we want to be a member of European Union and we don't care about the rest. But we are part of Caucasia, we are part of Middle East, we have good connections with the Central Asia, and beyond. So that geographic location also dictates Turkey to have a multidimensional foreign policy. So most of these debates about Turkey most of them are loaded with ideological, approaches or understandings of Turkey. I don't see the rational understanding or analysis of Turkey most of the time. What I see is, slogans, stereotypes, and cliches being exchanged, even in academia. And I fed up with this. I don't really get into discussion with this kind of, experts most of the time, because when I started to hear this kind of, cliches, I said, what is there to discuss? You have already an cliche that is a established fact for you, so there is nothing to discuss for you.
In my opinion, in the past, European states, they had this privilege to criticize certain steps of Turkey. But now, I think after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we started living in different world, right? Our neighborhood is in flames, basically, right, on fire. So now I think some, at least this academic sphere started to understand the Turkey position better. If you live surrounded by difficult neighbors, let's call it diplomatically, you need to reshape your foreign policy. You need to adjust, you need to adapt.
Yes. Plus, Europe has also lost its normative, let's say, power because of what happened also in Gaza, and the European, the weak reaction from Europe. The genocide happened in Gaza. More than 50,000 children, babies have been killed. There was no reaction at all.
Only Spain.
Only Spain, Spain. There are always exceptions, but the reaction and even the support was shocking for many people. But I don't think that European countries they did realize the damage they did to themselves. The only power, and this accepts also European Union, that Europe has is economic and normative power.
Soft power. We discussed this in our previous podcast.
But you are digging your own grave, and now they realize also the dangers of bandwagoning United States and Israel, whatever they do in the Middle East. Now they say that even the German government is criticizing Israel because they started this war with Iran. It was a stupid war from the beginning, right? And with no end planning, and now everybody is feeling the consequences of it, and now Israelis are talking about next target. Where this is going to end? How are you going to end this? Are you going to wage war against all the countries in the Middle East? This is crazy. And I think if Europe wants to reshape its strategic vision, it should start also with Israel, not only with the United States, because these two, they go together in the Middle East all the time, and the consequences we are paying. Turkey has paid, you are paying in the Slovakia, also in Ukraine, all around us, and if the next chapter in the international system will be so radical, a new system will emerge, then we need to rethink about all this, And there are already signs.
Past mistakes.
Yeah, past mistakes. And there are already signs from Europe. Many statements coming from Europe, very dramatic, let's say, changes and statements are coming.
Professor Enes Bayraklı from Turkish-German University in Istanbul. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Join with us
Thank you.
to our podcast. And I hope us will be Jakub about our future and about our social.
Yeah, thanks again to Professor for being with us. Hopefully you enjoyed this discussion, and please stay with us, stay tuned, and the video will be posted on YouTube as well as the recording will be uploaded to Spotify. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.